We're back with more of our roundtable, and we're talking about the coming fights, EJ, which include the threat from some Republicans of a government shutdown, or at least using the debt ceiling debate as ransom. You heard Leader McConnell not back away from that. Is that the future here, the near-term future of the president's second term?
I just want to say on Sandy relief, I don't understand why the House walked away from something that Congress has done in every other disaster. But I almost never get a chance to do this, so I want to say that I hope Republicans listen to Newt Gingrich, because Newt Gingrich is absolutely right when he says that using the debt ceiling as part of this fight would be an absolute catastrophe for the country. People talk about hostage taking. Who's the hostage here? The hostage here is the American economy. The hostage here are the American people. We're saying, if you don't give us what we want, we will risk wrecking the economy. That's bad substantively, and it's dumb politics. And I noted that Mr. McConnell did not answer your question, which made me wonder, where is he on this?
Senator. David, it's important to talk about what the debt ceiling really is. The debt ceiling has nothing to do with the future. It has to do with the past. The debt ceiling is allowing us to borrow money to pay money that we've already borrowed. It's as if we spend money on our credit card at the end of the month, say, well, I'm not going to pay it. And that wrecks your credit. And that's really what we're talking about. It's not about future opportunity to borrow. It's spending that's already been incurred. And if you look back to 2011, you can see the job numbers dip in the summer of 2011 when we went through that hostage taking.
And just as a matter of politics, Carly, I mean, the reality is you've got the business community that the White House will try to line up in a way that they haven't before to say, don't mess with this. John Engler, who I quoted earlier in the program, saying, don't play around with the debt ceiling. You saw what happened last time. That could give the president a little bit more strength, could it not here?
I agree, and I also agree that it is not wise to fool around with the debt ceiling. On the other hand, let us be realistic once again. If the debt ceiling is increased, and there is no progress on solving these fundamental problems that Erskine and Bowles spoke of, Moody's will still downgrade our credit, as they have been very clear in saying. And so I would argue that if the president is serious about not wanting an argument about the debt ceiling, then what he should put forward is a substantive and sincere process for when spending is going to be on the table. Because so far, we've had a commission, we've had a task force, we've had a fiscal cliff. Nothing has put spending on the table.
And I appreciate EJ's support here. But I want to make a point he may not be as enthusiastic about. They have two vehicles. Right. They have a continuing resolution, which is at the end of March, and they have the sequester bill. Now, these are legitimate government spending bills. The debt ceiling is different because it triggers all these international financial problems, and it triggers the credit of the United States. They don't have to say we're going to be wimps. I helped close the government twice. It actually worked. Bill Clinton came in and said the era of big government's over after two closures, not before.
You also wrote in your memoir that you regretted it from the point of view you relied too much on the enthusiasm of the activists and didn't factor in the disdain of the American people.
But we got reelected for the first time since 1928, and I would argue we would never have gotten to a balanced budget, and we would never have gotten welfare reform without that fight. So I think if the congressional Republicans want to say you're going to have a really hard time with continuing resolution, that's perfectly legitimate, and it's exactly the right grounds. And they can take the president's speech from yesterday, in which he said, once you have spent it, you have an obligation. That's and they say, terrific. We agree with you. We're not going to spend it.
Can I just come back to the senator for a second? As an independent voice, you said you'd caucus with the Democrats, but as an independent coming into the Senate, how do you think you can have a real impact on these debates and on the strategy and on the politics?
Well, in the first couple of weeks after I was elected, before even being sworn in, I came down here and had a series of meetings with a variety of senators. In fact, I met with 30 different senators. I think it was 11 Republicans, 19 Democrats. And what I found was my peculiar status as an independent, I could have frank discussions with both sides without being viewed as a member of the enemy camp. And we talked, for example, a lot about the filibuster. And I heard the Democratic side about abuse of the filibuster. I heard the Republican side about the abuse of the amendment process. And I feel I came up with a view that was more balanced than it might have otherwise been. I hope I can play that role, and that's certainly the role I hope to play. I'm going to be on the Rules Committee, for example, to talk about things like campaign finance reform. This budget thing, the reason it's not being resolved is the hard part is left to do. There's got to be more revenues. There's got to be more significant cuts. And there's no way, I spent a good deal of the campaign sort of digging into this. We're not going to grow our way out of it. There are going to be painful cuts, and I think that's why it's so hard. Nobody wants to do it. I agree, though. I agree. Here's where I agree with Senator McConnell. I think the president needs to take an affirmative step and say, look, we've got to do something here. He keeps saying it's going to involve revenues and cuts. Call some people together, I don't know who they are, and start working on it. We've all seen Lincoln. Lincoln got his hands dirty negotiating the 13th Amendment. And the president can't do it by remote control. I think you ought to call him up to Camp David, lock the door, and say, let's get it done.
David, I agree with a lot of what the senator just said, because you do have to have this balanced approach, which includes everything, painful cuts, some revenue, additional revenue. But we have to be honest, Carly, put everything on the table. We have already had over $1.5 trillion in spending cuts, not taxes, spending cuts in the last year's deal. We had over $700 billion in savings to Medicare under the Affordable Care Act that, in fact, a lot of Democrats got pounded on by Republicans during the campaign. And on top of that, we've got an additional $1.2 trillion in spending cuts that will take place unless we figure out a way to deal with the sequester in a more smart way. So that's over $2 trillion. That's close to $3 trillion in spending cuts that are in place now without us having to do a thing.
But it doesn't change the fact. It doesn't change the fact that everyone agrees that the fundamental issues sit in front of us. Reforming the tax code so that it is simpler, broaden the base, lower the rates, deal with health care costs, stabilize Social Security, get out of control spending under control, grow the economy. Those fundamental problems are still in front of us, despite good work by many on both sides. And the deal that we just...
And taxes. Just got to do it. We got to keep doing it in a balanced way.
First, I want to underscore something that both Ms. Fiorina and Newt Gingrich said, which is, let us right now. Why don't the Republicans announce we will take the debt ceiling off the table? We got other power we can use. Let's get rid of that issue right now. That would be great for the economy because there would be some certainty that we're not going down this crazy road.
I believe if Senator McConnell had said that this morning, the markets would have gone up 200 points.
Right, and then we could deal in a rational way. We would argue with each other. Newt Gingrich and I probably disagree quite radically on what needs to be done because I think we need more revenue than we got in this deal. And the other thing is we forget how much we've already done. There has been one deal after another that has cut spending very significantly. And that's why to say it's now only about spending and no more revenue on the table is just a big mistake. We've cut spending a lot.
You would get broad, widespread agreement if the revenue argument was, as Simpson Bowles have suggested, a vast simplification of the tax code. This latest deal complicated the tax code, continued corporate welfare, simplify the tax code, close the loopholes, lower the rates. You would get broad agreement. Unfortunately, that has never been put.
All right, let me come over.
You're right. That's what we need to do.
But let me come back to exactly the point that EJ just made. If we could, because the media plays a major role in this mess, okay? We went through fiscal cliff. Oh, my God. I was on your show that somebody from Bloomberg said it's...
Don't start bashing the media here.
No. Well, it's not a question of bashing. It's a question of mutual responsibility. Yep. The fact is, fiscal cliff became a way to hypnotize all of us to avoid thought. And then we all sat around saying, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? Now we have the crisis of the debt ceiling. And that will allow us to avoid thought. The House Republicans should meet with the 30 Republican governors who have vastly more than a majority of the population in their states.
Who all have to balance their budgets. They should spend the next month and a half on hearings. They should lay out, we have a $4 trillion government. Does anybody at this table seriously believe we couldn't find things to eliminate that, in fact, the country would be overwhelmingly happy with? Sometimes first steps towards success are doing easier things, not harder things.
Can I ask, I've got 30 seconds left, Senator. I want to put you on the spot in a couple quick ways. Senator Hagel, could you vote to confirm him as Defense Secretary?
Well, I'm going to be on the Armed Services Committee, so I'm going to reserve judgment. But let me just share my standard, because I have thought about this. I start with the premise that the president should be able to appoint his own people. As a member of the cabinet, I think the standard is different for a cabinet member than it is for a judge who's in for life. So I start with that premise. But I'm going to want to ask some serious questions, hear from Senator Hagel about the issues. He's a guy with a distinguished record, and I'm going to listen to the answers.
All right, let me get another break in here. We'll be back right after.